Welcome to the Atlanta.NET Users Group. Our guest speaker tonight is Steve Bilogan. Steve's a senior engineer, works a lot on the Uno open source projects, and has tremendous amount of Uno experience to share with us this evening. So Steve, take it away.
All right, cool. Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay. If you don't see the slides, someone yell.
Good. I see them.
Okay.
And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well.
Cool. All right, all set up. All right, cool. Yes, so hello, hi. My name is Steve. I'm an engineer on the Uno platform team. And yeah, I'm just excited to share what we've been working on and, spread the word. So yeah, if you've gone to any talks about, multi-platform, cross-platform solutions, everyone has this type of slide, right? So this is the problem space that we're kind of trying to solve, right? Basically, it comes to this point where, you want to hit your markets, you want to hit certain platforms, you have a product that you want to put for iOS, for Android, for the web, for blah, 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 The biggest hill to climb really is basically getting all those done separately on their own native stacks and having to, duplicate effort and all that stuff. But another good sort of thing that falls in the problem space that we're looking to solve here is is our enterprise applications, like old, like WPF, whatever, like older enterprise apps. We can modernize them and bring them to something like the web using WebAssembly, right? Otherwise, it's it would be something like that would have like a very high rewrite cost. And the other thing that comes into play when you're in this space is the skill of your expertise of your team, right? So like if everyone's super good in Objective-C or Swift, like you can tackle the iOS, but you can't really, you have to get another team to do the Android one and get another team to do the web one. And so that's really what we want to address, like those three sort of areas. And so our solution basically is what I'm talking about today. So it's the Uno platform, right? So, excuse me. So the Uno platform is basically allowing you write your application once, right? Like top to bottom, front end to back end, using XAML and C#, and you can deploy it to any of the platforms you would like for whatever ones you're reaching for, right? So with that, we usually like to say that Uno platform is what we call truly universal, right? So what this means is that basically or what we are thinking or hoping is that we think that WinUI, the new UI framework for Windows, WinUI is the best framework. So it's built from the ground up with responsiveness, with adaptiveness, all of that in mind, right? Which means that by leveraging something like the WinUI framework or the APIs, you can have something working on small devices all the way to large 4K screens with everything in the middle, right? There's support for all of those different form factors, different, responsive designs and all that stuff within the WinUI framework. And so with Uno, basically what we're doing is we're building that bridge from this WinUI technology that is, for Windows, and bringing it to all these other platforms. So truly making it like a universal or truly universal sort of framework, right? So if so I'll hit our line. So if you haven't heard of Uno before, right? So basically what I'm going to be talking about today is Uno platform, which is an open source project. So it helps developers build single code base C# and WinUI XAML for non-Windows platforms. Right. So with the Uno platform, you build these pixel perfect applications by leveraging what I'll get into in a bit, but by leveraging things like the lookless controls or the control templating sort of idea that comes from the WinUI framework and those before it. So basically, it means that you don't have to what we're doing is we're actually providing you with the native widgets, the native UI components, right, from each individual native platform. But on top of that is a blank canvas, and you can use the XAML primitives and all that stuff to basically draw how your control will look, but you still get the rich, like feature-rich functionality and things like accessibility or localization. So you get that all built in because you're actually using the native button for iOS and Android or whatever, native text box. It's just we're basically allowing you to keep it native, keep it looking native, or do whatever you want with it. So that's what we mean by pixel perfect, because everything is in your hands to be able to make it look however you'd like, but it's still going to act like you would expect on the individual platforms, right? And so we also have my laser pointer. Yes, so one of the things that we are really talking about a lot now, which is what we'll get into, is all these new things that have come out since our 4.0 release, right? So right now, we, like, as the Uno platform stands, it is this layer here that allows us to hit those native stacks other than Windows. And so now we like to say that, with the 4.0 release, we're bringing like the platform part of Uno into existence, right? So we're building upon that and giving you more and more tooling and more support to be able to bootstrap apps, to be able to build apps quickly and all that fun stuff, right? So that's going to be like a little bit later on, but basically that is the extensions, the toolkit that we have now, the Figma plugin, which we're really excited for. So we'll talk all about that soon. But basically, like what I'm trying to get for this slide is just basically to get it straight that, like, we're building directly on top of .NET, right? And it also takes advantage of the great, like, Windows platform features, like I mentioned, like accessibility and touch and keyboard and focus, as well as rich controls like calendar, like grid, like charts from the Windows Community Toolkit, or certain Infragistics or Syncfusion, like certain vendors, of which all support Uno, right? And so Uno is actually sitting, like I mentioned, on those native stacks, and it utilizes the native platform SDKs. But along with that, we are also able to use Skia as a backend to target even more platforms, like Windows 7 apps or Linux, right? So Skia itself is the 2D rendering library where basically we can then draw pixel by pixel what we want, and it's not a native widget anymore. It's a different backend that is more like the Flutter type of way of just blank canvas, and you draw your controls. So that's what I want to do next. So that brings us into basically this sort of comparison. I don't like that word, but basically this whole problem space, everything that we're trying to do now with these multi-platform framework options that are out there, they kind of fall into two categories, right? So there's a lot of it's important for us to have that. We think, like, the app developers themselves should have 100% total control of how your app looks, even when you're using a multi-platform framework, right? And so there's some on one end and some on the other end of the spectrum that you don't get that full control that we're trying to get people to use, right? So there's multiple strategies to be able to do multi-platform development, like we're talking about. And so at one end of the spectrum, there's people creating abstractions on top of native platforms, which we're doing as well. But they just kind of let the native platform controls render how they natively do, right, on the platform, and you get not as much control over the way those views can look, right? And at the other end of that spectrum is what I just mentioned before, where you just slap a canvas on the screen and you draw every single pixel yourself. And so there's trade-offs with that as well. Like you're losing some of those native behaviors, like copy paste or localization or accessibility, all that feature-rich stuff that's in a native component, like a button from iOS or Android or Mac OS. And so what we're trying to do with what I mentioned before with localist controls or the control templating stuff, with the power of that, basically it puts us sort of right in the middle between those two between those two ends of the spectrum, right? So we do have that abstraction over the native controls, and we do have the ability to have Skia as a backend as well. But on top of that, like what I mentioned, we can just say, okay, let the platform do its thing. Like you're just asking for a button, so I'll give you the UI button from iOS, and that's how it looks natively, you know. But the thing is, we have that extra layer on top that we can now say, okay, give me the true native control, but then give me a small little canvas that I can draw it 100% how I would like, you know. So you kind of get best of both worlds, really, because you get that pixel perfectness, but you still don't lose any of the things I was mentioning, like I don't know, localizability or accessibility or copy paste, you know, like anything that comes built into the network, or sorry, to the platform control itself, right? And so this slide has been with us since the very beginning, and I'm never letting it go. But it's just funny now, you know, like it used to be 2 or 3 little arrows. Right now it's growing and growing and growing. So I like to keep this slide just for fun, but a very basic example, right? So like it's just, this is some WinUI XAML that we're looking at, and off you go, right? Like you compile it, and by default, like out of the box, Uno will style everything in the Fluent, sort of Windows Fluent theme, right? So you can see they all look pretty much the same. They have the same colors, the same whatever. But then again, like I mentioned, like you do have the power to render that however you'd like, right? So let's see if I can get, oh, it always locks me up. Okay, so no, we don't want to look at Figma yet. We want to go to VS Code. Yeah, so just as a little, like we can actually see that little sample we were talking about. We could see it in action, right? I have something pretty like similar enough to what we're talking about. Just a very simple, you know, can I zoom in? There you go. So I just have like, you know, a button with some content and a slider, right? And this is a Uno application that, undo, there you go. This is an Uno application that that you just unused up for VS Code specifically, right? So we have templates and we have the .NET tooling in the CLI you could just bootstrap an app and it's good to go, and it works with VS Code as well as Rider, Visual Studio for Mac, you know, it has all those capabilities. So if we were to look at something, oops, I'm already running. There you go. If we were to, yeah, if we want to see this in action on like the WebAssembly in the browser, right? So we can run this. I want to split the screen. Boy. Okay. We'll give it a second, but basically, yeah, it loads it up. Like it packages our stuff. So this is pure WebAssembly, right? So it's fully native. It looks a little bit different now because we're using the newer Fluent styles from that screenshots before. But you know, it's fully good to go, and it's the exact WinUI controls that you know and that you've defined in your XAML, but now they're working natively on the web as well, right? And so again, like we're really excited about all the VS Code stuff. So this is I have installed our VS Code, our Uno platform, like VS Code extension, which, you know, is obviously letting us run Uno apps and all that stuff, but it also provides its own language server protocol for IntelliSense or autocomplete, right? So if I were to go into the slider, right, I could say background, you know, red. Failed to save. Uh-oh, I must have screwed something up. Oh no. Something happened. There you go. Okay. Yeah, so there you go. And then the sliders, you know, it changes, right? And if I were to do something like, you know, we want to add a click event handler for the button, it reloaded everything. And if I click now, yeah, it should hit in the, okay, I'm gonna get rid of this. Yeah, it should hit in the code behind, right? That I have a breakpoint set up and it's ready to go. And, you know, you're same as any other debugging session, you know, you have your watch stuff, you have your call stack, so everything's there and it's fully debuggable, and you're debugging a native WebAssembly application using VS Code. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And that's basically, yeah, that's it's as far as we can go with our little slider example. So we'll get into some bigger stuff in a moment. But the other thing I wanted to show you was the gallery, right? So the gallery is just basically an application written in using Uno and for displaying the power of Uno, right? So it displays. We'll look at it in a second. How do I get there? It display. There we go. So this is basically it's a WebAssembly app like we were just looking at before with the slider. It's a much bigger WebAssembly app. And we have those capabilities to display, like this. Well, everything's been updated now, so I'll get into it in a second. But what we're looking at is the Material Design 3 styles for these components, these UI components, right? So, we have the material button. You can go back to the default stuff you'll get out of the box without the material theme installed, right? Like you'll get the normal Fluent buttons, and you could style them as well in different ways, such as like in the Cupertino style as well, right? So that's again that power of control templating, right? Like these are all actually native controls for whichever platform you're on, but because of that lookless control stuff, we can paint it or draw it however we'd like, right? So basically this will cover all the supported WinUI controls that we have. But it also goes above and beyond. Like I mentioned before, one of our new things that I'll get into in a bit is the Toolkit. So it's basically a collection of more complex controls that do a lot of stuff for you, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And some basic things that we would like to have. So like, we have this idea of a tab bar, right? So in Material, it has the ripples, it has all that going on. It's, you have different styles for it. And all that fun stuff. Same idea for Cupertino. It has a theme for it in that iOS type of feel for just basic tabs, like a tab bar, right? So that's a more of the simple controls that's in Toolkit, but it's very powerful, and it is actually the backend for a lot of our other Toolkit solutions use this tab bar, but it's all done through styling, right? Because like the styling and these control templating things are super powerful. And like light and dark mode is all supported out of the box and all that fun stuff. So this is all just using the normal WinUI APIs, but it's just running natively in the web right now. So that's always fun to show. Let's get the slides. Right. So I'm not going to go through all this stuff and talk about every single step, but Uno has been here for quite some time. Like it started out way back in the day. I don't think Xamarin Forms was a thing yet when we started doing the initial code for this. Basically, yeah, but it's been used for professional applications all the way since back then, since 2013 and on. And it's grown and grown and grown, obviously. And 2018 was really the most exciting time. WebAssembly was here, and Mono was able to run on the browser using WebAssembly. So they sort of just packaged it up and saw if they could get Uno as well running in the browser natively with WebAssembly, and it worked. And I think that year they're running around Microsoft Build conference on the show floor, like trying to show anyone, like look what we did, like it's running in the browser. So it's been a really fun ride, and so there's been lots of stuff, lots of new features. This is way back when we just we kept going. So the material and the Fluent stuff that I mentioned before. There's Cupertino here. So all those styles have been here for a little while, and we're continuing to go more and more. So like basically, if we were to look back, we have 6 to 8 release cycles per year. We're already at 3 for this year, so we're going to have much more this year because we have a lot of stuff to come. But yeah, basically our 4.0 release was what I mentioned. So lots of other enhancements and features, but we also have the addition of those extensions, the Uno extensions, which we haven't looked at yet. The Toolkit, so we looked a little bit at it. We'll do a deeper dive. The Figma Plug-In, which is super awesome, and I'm going to talk about in a second. And then that VS Code extension, which we just looked at as well. So it was a fun release, and yeah, we're going forward. We have 0-day support for all things, like the .NET 6 mobile stuff and the WinUI Project Reunion or WinApp SDK. We have 0-day releases for all those things. So we have a lot of releases coming up for this year for sure.
And do you guys also have tooling to help people that are migrating from, Windows Forms or WPF, UWP, or Xamarin for that matter, to move into,
Yeah, there are tools for basically like UWP to WinUI. I'm not actually sure. I'd have to check. I don't believe so. Like not for Xamarin Forms or for WPF in such a way. But with WPF we have that little Skia backend, so it'll still work. But as for changing it to like the WinUI APIs, like converting them, I don't believe so at this point. But we do have tooling for the step from UWP to WinUI because it's a smaller step.
Yeah, it's one of the questions I get all the time from when I'm talking to people about different platforms out there. It's always how do I get there from where I am?
Yeah,
it's like
that's something we're
hard work and dedication.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure there's stuff. I have to dive more into it. I'm sure there's stuff. I'll look into it. But yeah. So it's been a wild ride so far, and it's been really fun. So, but yeah, as we like to say now, technically, like Microsoft would be Uno's largest contributor, right, to our project. Not only because we're taking WinUI and bringing it to all these other platforms and using their APIs, right? It's just that the Windows developer, the Windows platform dev team is actively helping us and allowing us to have access to things like their actual C++ code for WinUI. Like this, we have the actual code that runs on Windows right now for WinUI and UWP. Oh, sorry. And not just like the open source Microsoft UI XAML controls stuff. Like we got the whole thing, right? And so that is able to actually migrate. So we take that C# code and obviously we bring it to C++ code and we bring it to the C# land. And we're able to actually migrate the exact logic that happens in the true Windows WinUI controls and the same behaviors and everything and replicate those on all other platforms, right? So as an example, right, we had something like the calendar view, right? So or the calendar, date picker, sorry. And so that was a big, like thousands of lines of code and like all this crazy stuff. But it worked. Like it looks the same across all platforms and it works on all these other platforms, right? Like you tweak it a little bit for certain intricacies between different platforms, but for the most part, this is Microsoft's original code running, but now it's running on Android, iOS, macOS, Linux, So it's really, really cool. And one of the best things that it comes along with this access to their source code is we also have access to all their unit tests, right? And they have a lot for all their controls, and that's good. We're happy about that. So we get to bring over all those as well. So we get a lot more defenses up to, deal with any regressions that come with these controls down the line. But it's a big endeavor to bring those over, but we're going to bring more and more of them over. Another big one that we did, it was in the timeline, I think, but it was our refactoring of the grid, right? Because back in the day, like when we started building the grid, you basically play around with a grid in a WinUI or a UWP app back then, and you just try and replicate what you can see from the things you do with it, right? Now we actually have the real code, and it increased the performance. I don't have the numbers, but it was like a ridiculous increase in performance because they had all these things that they were doing that no one ever knew about, right? Like it was in a black box at that point. So we got to see all that stuff, and yeah, grid is now over as well. Is that like the grid that you're using is the Microsoft one, but it's running on all these other platforms, right? And yeah, so like people talk about or always ask us about like the sort of the ecosystem around Uno. Like is there enough support for it in these other projects? And yeah, and we're more and more coming. Definitely more coming, but you have any .NET Standard 2 library will work out of the box. Like you see Skia there, you see the Windows Community Toolkit and their the toolkit, the MVVM toolkit, I think it's called. So that's all there. We do have those third-party support controls. Like I mentioned with Infragistics and Sync Fusion, we have more, and then we have more coming. And then on top of that, it's all compatible with any sort of presentation framework, so Reactive UI or Prism or whatever. All those things are good to go, right? And for the most part, it's if you look at these vendors or you look at these libraries, if they're able to target UWP or WinUI, there's not that much to do to make it target every other single platform that Uno supports, right? Because we're bringing those APIs over, so it should work out of the box most of the time. You just have to do maybe some tweaks, but it's not a big overhaul to get vendors or get framework maintainers to support Uno, which is one of the good things to tell them, and so we can get into more. That's just like basic stuff around Uno and like how it works, I guess. But now we can get into some like the latest developments that have been happening over the past few months. Starting with the 4.0 release in November, but we're ramping up a lot more, so we have more and more releases coming. But one of the ones that I think is really cool, because it was me that did it, was the V2, I guess, of Uno themes. So what we looked at before, I'll just bring it up. What we looked at before, over here. Okay, yeah. So you see it like we have this material and these Cupertino. I'll get one with a Fluent. That might be better. Right, so if we look at the buttons again, so like out of the box, you have Fluent, right? And that's just what Uno gives you. And then we have other, we have an Uno themes repo that contains packages for material and Cupertino, and it provides those stylings and the nice ripple effects, and it uses the proper color palettes and all that fun stuff. And so, I'll get the slide back. So basically, with this themes v2, the big thing that we did basically was bring over Material Design 3, or introduce Material Design 3 to the material package that we have. But it does still support the the older Material Design 2. So they're both there and they coexist, right? And so these themes, what we call them, they're styles for all the existing and currently supported WinUI controls within Uno. But on top of that, there's also support for the Toolkit controls. So, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the things that I was talking about before, like tab bar and other more complex-ish controls that they don't exist within the WinUI APIs, those are brought over in Toolkit, and they also have support for Cupertino and material styling as well. And so V2 has also been our initial support for what we are hoping to unveil, in the future. Is this support for a unified theming system, right? So we don't want to have like we do now. It's just stepping stone. But basically, if you have a text box, you have a Cupertino text box style, you have a material text box style, you have a Fluent text box style, but we have a common sort of language now for all the style keys that we would like. So you just have the default text box style, and you wouldn't tell it wouldn't be prescribed by the style name that you're giving it. So you're not saying material text box style, right? It's just a text box style, and whichever theme that you've bootstrapped into your application, it will find those and use the appropriate styles for whichever design system you want, right? So you just plug in material and it'll connect to those keys, and off it goes. So this was the first initial phase of doing that for material. So Cupertino and Fluent, are up next. So there will be a lot of releases for themes this year for sure. Right. Okay. So the extensions. So this is a massive thing that was added, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but I just want to sort of give a introduction to what it is. So to help you bootstrap a new Uno application and get started with proper architecture, what Uno has introduced are these Uno extensions, right? So the idea is that you should, like it said, it doesn't say it, but you should never need to rewrite code from scratch for commonly used functions, right? So things like your dependency injection, your serialization, your configurations, your navigation logic, whatever, all those things you don't have to rebuild for each app, you know. And so we also wanted to make it, you still have always the option with these extensions. So with these sort of, these like architecture blocks that you could put into your code or put into your application, it still retains all the options for extending any of these features. So they're all extensible, and they have lots of hooks in it to do any customization you'd like, right? And so this is sort of following the Microsoft model here, where Microsoft extracted all that hosting, all those hosting capabilities, and it's from within ASP.NET, right? And they made it available through the Microsoft extensions. So it covers, like I mentioned, like hosting, logging, configuration, etc., all those types of things. And so Uno platform extensions are basically based on those Microsoft extensions that we're bringing it to all these other platforms as well, right? So if we wanted to look at one of the extensions, or one of the big ones, is the navigation extension, right? So basically we provide a unified paradigm for all types of navigation, right? So it is able to handle frame-based navigation, like we're used to within a Windows application, modal pages, modal navigation, any sort of navigation that has been triggered by selecting an item in a view or selecting something in a picker, as well as returning data from certain types of navigation, and dynamically adding views to different regions, and the regions we'll talk about in a second. But basically, this navigation system that you can just plug and play into your application in Bootstrap is it's fully declarative, and it can be used directly from XAML or from your view models, and it supports all your favorite presentation patterns, right? So that's the coolest thing, is this can all be done declaratively within your XAML. You don't even have to have any navigation logic in the C# world if you don't want. So we'll look at it in a second, but it's really cool. But I am no expert in it, right? So for a detailed explanation for Uno navigation, as well as extensions in general, you can look at UnoConf that we had back in November, and Nick Randolph has a session on it, and he's the guy who built it, so he's going to be able to explain a lot of it much better than I am, right? But if we wanted to look at a little example of this navigation stuff, we can. So just for context, before we look at the code, where am I? Yes. Okay, we have this this little reference application that will be used for displaying the proper ways to use extensions and themes and all those types of things. And so these are the mock-ups, like the designs for that app in Figma. But if we were to look at things like here, so this would be the deals page. We'll look at the XAML for it in a second, but basically it's not that, it's not that complex, right? So we have those tab-based navigations, whether they're at the top. So like obviously you're going to be toggling between deals and favorites, as well as the same thing. You have a navigation capabilities from the bottom, right? And so what's powerful is these are their own controls. Obviously, like this is a toolkit control for the bottom tab bar, and this is also a toolkit control for just like a tab experience. But the Uno navigation plugin, extension, has the capabilities, and it knows how to plug into these toolkit controls, as well as just the normal WinUI controls as well, right? So if we were to look at the deals page, so what we're looking at so this is the code for the actual, this one. So this is the code for the actual page, or for that actual app that we were looking at in Figma. So this is what we get out of it. And if we wanted to look at something like navigation done fully through the XAML, would be deals tab. There you go. Oh no. Yes, that was right. Okay, so what we were looking at before, basically that those deals and those favorite top tabs there. Where is it again? Here. So these guys. If we were to look at the code for what that actually is, oh God, I keep opening the wrong thing. There you go. It's actually so this is our toolkit library, and I'll show you. We'll go into a bit more detail later, but basically it is that tab bar control, right? And we have these Uno extension navigation properties that we could set on things like the tab bar item, right? So this tab bar item specifically, its region is the deals tab, right? And so if we were to look at where else we see deals tab, it would be, don't mind this, we'll talk about it in a second, feed view, but it will know and it will be able to find this layout structure that has the same matching name as itself. And based on that, it'll be able to see, it'll be able to hide anyone else at that level that is not set to that region. It'll be able to hide those and then display this either page or grid or whatever, like any layout sort of thing that you define the region name on. It will be able to swap those out like as you would, right? So, and there's nothing else to do except hook them both up to the region, right? And that's all you got to do within the XAML. So it's really, really cool, and it's really powerful. We'll get into a bit more of the extensions, and we'll look more into this app in a second. But actually, we'll be looking at it right now. But the other extension that I wanted to quickly go over was our reactive extensions. So now we have we have reactive extensions provided by the Uno team, right? That will work within Uno applications, and so basically what we've done is we've introduced this notion of a feed, right? So it's inspired by the Kotlin flows or the streams and reactive extensions itself, but basically we can easily package the various states that data can go through within a single interface of ifeed of t, right? And so it enables us to have reactive, declarative, and immutable programming styles when we're talking about when we're doing our presentation logic and stuff, right? So again, we're going to look into that commerce app that we were just looking at, but basically the idea here, right, is you have your view models. So you define your view models just as you normally would, and you provide it with the properties that you want to be bound to in the view. And then we do our little bit of magic, right? So we generate this bindable version of your view model, and that's actually going to be the glue that connects your view. So the view actually talks to the bindable one, and the bindable one talks to the view model you created. So it's like a little middleman guy. And that's where all the magic happens with, the iNotify property change, with the dealing of the state in all those ways of whatever T is within your ifeed of T, right? So if we wanted to look at it, what am I trying to show? Products view model. So, well, first we'll go to the page. Actually, no, we'll go to the view model. Okay. So like I was mentioning, right? Like you just have your view models as you normally would, and then you expose your properties, right? And so there's a bit more that goes into it. There's some types that I didn't mention, but they're all within the reactive family, and they're all documented, so we can dig deeper into it. But basically, we have the items that we're going to show on. Oh, I wanted to show you first the product page, right? So it's this page that we're looking at. So it's it's going to have the text box for filtering and searching, and then it's just as a list of products or items that you're going to have, right? So if we look, right, so those products are going to be this items property, and this is it's an iList feed, but whatever, they all connect together, right? So it is a feed of a list of products, right? And so that feed will automatically wrap around it and give it those capabilities of hooking into any state that the feed may be in for reloading or error, or got the or like it has the content, so all those sort of states, those will all be dealt with by the feed view that we saw before. So if we were to look, we have these items here, right? So if we go to the products page, we will have, if we look for items, we will have a feed view, right? And so that is where that is sort of that's the special toolkit control that works with the reactive extensions, and that's where it will be able to understand what an ifeed of list of products or an ilist feed of products is, and it will be able to give you the proper whichever state it's in at any point in time. It will be able to handle any of that within the UI itself, right? And it's very, very extensible too. So yeah, so basically you have your feed view, you just bind to that list feed right there, and then you're off to the races, and you can do whatever you want within here. I don't think it has all the templates for like all the states, but that's where you would basically do it, where you can hook into any of the states that the data would be in at any point in time, right? And so how those sort of talk to each other, I know this is getting into the weeds, and but it's just really cool. So how those really talk together is that glue that generated middle part, right? And so that is our products view model. We'll have this bindable products view model generated for it, right? And then it will create all that stuff, right? So the items here, it sees that it needs to be a list feed of products, right? So now it's wrapping it within like the bindable version of that list feed and blah, 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 and whatever. So it's allowing for that binding from the XAML to work, right? And it's able to understand how to report the data back, because this is where all our iNotify property change stuff is for your view model and all that fun stuff. It's all wrapped within here, right? So this, you don't really have to care at this point. Like, this is just to show you all that like magic, like this is where it's sort of happening. But for the most part, it's just the normal view model that you connect to your UI, and like you're good, right? As long as you're using the extensions, all this magic happens without you noticing anything. That's the whole point. And so that's where we get this sort of MVU X name, right? So like our little X factor is that bindable glue within the middle of the view and the model, and the action, that you do on the model, the U part. So where there, and so there are many other extensions, and I'll go back and we'll look at it for a quick second after. But those are the two big guys, our navigation and reactive. So there's lots of documentation around them as well now. So we've updated all that along with our 4.0 release, as well as there's other sessions at UnoConf and other sessions that have been happening within this past since 4.0. Like we could probably find, and they'll be the people that created that one will be explaining it better than I did, but just to get the gist of it, and so there was themes, there was extensions, and now there's the toolkit. So the Uno toolkit is basically a multi-platform first UI component library, and it helps to speed up, or it's there to speed up your development, right? So it's built with this cross-platform idea in mind already, and it is designed specifically for, like I mentioned, multi-platforms by being able to be responsive at its core, right? Like these controls are built to be placed in different screen sizes on a browser or on a small screen on the phone, and they're all built to be perfectly responsive in those scenarios, right? So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with these things. So we'll go into a little bit, but just as certain headline things, because what we're going to be going to next after this is the Figma plugin. And so all these controls, like we looked at on top of the WinUI controls, all these toolkit controls are also supported by the Figma plugin. They're also supported by the material and the Cupertino theme engine that we built and all that stuff. So it's just another package of controls that live well within the Uno ecosystem. So if we wanted to look at the two big guys, that would be navigation bar and tab bar. So tab bar, we looked at a little bit, but basically navigation bar, this is what helps you deal with navigation logic for your application, abstracting away sort of all the native parts that might be happening, especially for things like Android and iOS, right? So it provides a single source back button implementation, so your application can behave the same on all mobile and tablet form factors, right? So it's a little tricky the way it does it, and it's if you want to look into it later, it's really cool. But basically, on Android and iOS, what's actually happening here is if you define a navigation bar within your page, we'll say, okay, read all the property. Oh, the sun is crazy in my. Okay, read all the properties in my navigation bar, but apply those to the native UI navigation bar or the native toolbar on Android. So it's actually the native control that you're seeing there, and we just kind of forward those properties over, and then we kind of hook into certain things like when the native back button is pressed, we want to be able to fire if you have a command hooked up in the XAML for what's going to happen, like it all connects and it does all its fun stuff. But yeah, it's reactive to the backstack and all that fun stuff. It's also able to detect itself when it's in a modal state, so within a pop-up or anything like that, and it will know, like if you are attempting to do the back navigation and the backstack is full and I'm in a pop-up, you close yourself, right? And these are all extensible and easy to turn on and off, basically. And so the tab bar also, at its core, it's used mainly, so it's a top-level navigation component, right? And it helps you implement those tab-based navigation scenarios in multi-platform mobile applications for the most part. Like it's used on all platforms, but like this is where you'd see it utilized the most, right? So like I mentioned before, the navigation extensions all have plugins, or not, sorry, no, they all have what am I trying to say? The toolkit controls, are all supported by the navigation extension, right? So it knows how to deal with a tab bar item being selected and firing off a navigation. So it hooks into all those things. Tab bar itself also is very basic itself, right? It's just a items control. It's just a list of tabs that has selection support, right? And then it's the power of these control templates. So it's a power of these styles. So this is the bottom tab bar style. We also have the other tab bar style that we saw before for deals and favorites on that page there, which is much simpler, right? But either way, you can style it however you'd like. It just comes prepackaged with a few useful styles itself. And the other two, the drawer. Okay, so the drawer control is basically allowing you to provide your users quick access to certain destinations and app functionality, right? So like sliding something up to switch accounts or anything like that, right? So, and the drawer can be activated by pulling on the menu icon or just be permanently pinned on the screen, and you have the option to, say like which direction you want it to be pulled out of, right? And then the real hero of what I mentioned before, so these toolkit controls are built with adaptiveness and responsiveness in mind. The hero of that sentence, or the reason I'm allowed to say that sentence, is that we have this auto layout control that exists in the toolkit. And so basically it helps you the auto layout control helps you quickly create layouts that handle different screen sizes and orientations, right? So it has all those abilities. And so it's the auto layout control itself can dynamically calculate, the size and the position of all the views in your view hierarchy, and it's based on, we'll look at it in a second, but it bases itself on constraints that are placed on those views, right? So everything's wrapped within an auto layout, and it's relative to one another. You can tell it where things should be aligning and where it should all go, right? And the last thing, not the last thing, sorry, we to put this earlier, but yeah, we looked at this, right? So the VS Code integration was a really cool thing we did as well with debugging capabilities and all that. But everything I'm talking about now all comes down to this scenario that we are really excited about. So we wanted the ability to go from these high fidelity Figma designs, like I was showing you before, like those screens from that example commerce app. We want to be able to go from those designs to developer-friendly XAML code, which can be built on and extended, rather quickly. And so we want to easily generate packages that are ready to use in your project. So you could just plop this code in, right, and it'll work. So using the Uno Figma plugin, which is what we released 4.0, it allows you to export XAML, and it reduces your startup time for projects and new app screens by a lot. It does most of all the work, and then it's just up to you to tweak a few things that maybe we can't always generate because it's application specific or whatever, right? So basically, what happens here is we're trying to eliminate the back and forth of the the design to developer handoff hassle, right? We can create these pixel perfect applications using this plugin because they're actually true to the way that they were designed to look and behave, because we have this plugin to just basically take the layout and do the exact same thing in the actual XAML. And so it has pre-configured, like I mentioned before, the Figma plugin itself, when it's generating all this stuff, it knows how to generate all Uno controls, so all WinUI supported controls, but also all Toolkit controls. It knows how to generate them for Material, for Cupertino, for Fluent. It has all that stuff, right? So what is going on with this? Oh, okay. Right. So basically, we have the first and the only C# XAML UI platform that is allowing us to do this within Figma, right? So we want to limit the amount of round trips that you're having basically between yourself as a developer and the designer, right? So you kind of can work at the same time almost. And so the big two things here are this component library that I mentioned. So the Figma file for the Uno Figma plugin has all the components and all the states and all the different variations that you can do for Uno controls, but it also has the live preview, right? So you can actually see what your application will look like live, and it's actually a generated Uno application using the XAML that was generated, right? So we'll look at it right now. So we'll look at it right now. If we wanted to, there you go. So like I mentioned, so here we're looking at this example app, right? So the code that we were looking at just previously, when I was showing you the deals tabs and the feed views and all that fun stuff in the XAML, that was actually all generated from this Figma file. This is the application's UI screens, and they just take that and you generate it and we plop it into the code. Obviously, you have to do there's some tweaks that have to happen, but for the most part, that's it, right? That app that we were looking at with all that XAML, that was done by this plugin. And if you were to look back at it, you'll see the way that it's able to be done, right, is because you have, oh no, wrong page. Where am I? Product page. Yeah, is because you have all these auto layout controls from the toolkit, right? So it's able to read the design file and say okay, it has these justify for the space between or the primary and counter alignments and all that stuff, and that's all generated by the plugin, and that's how it's able to make it. It's not magic floating numbers of width and height and x and y anymore, so it's all responsive and relative to any other view within the UI, right? Yes. So what did I want to show? So first the components. So this is the example app. But if we look, this would be like our component library, basically that for everything that the Uno Figma plugin supports, right? So if we were to look just at something quickly, I lost myself. This is for the material designed ones, basically. But we have all the different types of buttons that you can get going. You can have different styles. It has all the toggles here for outlined. And it changes everything it needs, right? But so basically, the biggest thing is the previewer. So that's the last thing I want to show. But if we were to look at a simple page, like let's do the login page, right? So we can open up the plugin, and it'll take a second to load. But you open it up within the context of your selected UI element within the Figma, and you refresh, and it'll look. And this is actually, I'll just change it to light mode. This is actually a true WebAssembly application running with that XAML in this little window. So it's actually like, this is a little, it's using the browser, right? So it's the WebAssembly head of a UNO application, but it generates that XAML, it plops it in here, and this is an actual running application that you can play with and prototype quickly with your designs, right? Like if you were to look back here, you see all the auto layouts that get generated, and it's using the password box, the buttons, the text boxes, it's using all that stuff, right? And you can connect it with things like data sources. So it's able to understand, I cannot scroll. It's able to understand your bindings, right? So depending on how you drop your components into your UI file, it'll be able to bind to its data context and things like that. And if we were to look at other things like, you can do things like, actually, we'll go back for a second. So, there you go. If I wanted to do something, like I mentioned before, you have all those variants that the Uno plugin, Uno plugin component, oh my God, that it supports, right? So if we look at button here, everything's in the way right now. You see, we have these variants that we can use and define, right? Say that, yes, I want this to be a leading icon now, and I want the type of the text to be outlined, right? And so you see it's changed here, right, to be whatever that variant of the button style. And so if we were to refresh, it live changes within the actual application, and this is like a true, like I can click it, and there's a ripple and everything, like it's actually running there in WebAssembly. So it's really cool. And then we have other, like just quickly, other things like localization, say. So if you toggle that on within your settings for the plugin, and then you refresh, right? It'll recreate it. This XAML here isn't the source of truth. What you actually have to do is click the export XAML button, right? And that will give you. It'll wrap it, it'll create all the namespaces for you, it'll create all the static resources that it needs if you're using vector graphics within that page. But the thing that I wanted to show was basically the localization, right? So it will look at any text or any content or whatever that's localizable, and it'll generate you the UIDs that you can use for your localization file. So it has fun little things like that, as well as there's toggles for accessibility, so you can do certain things for automation and all that. So it's able to generate all that stuff for you. So this commerce app is, for the most part, it's mostly all generated from the Figma file that we are looking at right now. And it has support again for the toolkit. It has support for reactive, so it's able to generate the feed view for you and connect it to the data source. So yeah, lots of fun stuff within that plugin. And that's it. Yeah. So I just put up this slide just to show, like, again, I want to hit home, like Uno's been around for a while, and there are a ton of professional applications that have been built with it. So well, usually I do this in the States and no one knows what I'm talking about, but like, see, you have the U of Ottawa, you have Air Canada, and, it's like all stuff that, and Cineplex. I don't know if there's Cineplex in the States, but anyway, it's like these big applications that are running right now live in production and they're all running Uno, right? And one of the big ones is Trade Zero that's going to be released soon. So it's like a public trading company. And so they have a mobile, web, and desktop goal of being supported, and it's about to be released, I believe. So, and that's all running with Uno. And you can see they're very UI heavy, right, in their application. So that was a fun one, and there's a lot of excitement for that one, as well as the NuGet Package Explorer, right? So I'm just going to blow through these because it's fine. But basically, yeah. So the NuGet, if you actually go to NuGet.org and you search for an you search for a NuGet package, on the right bar you'll see a link to open it in NuGet Package Explorer, and that is actually a native WebAssembly application now that's running, powered by Uno, and you'll be able to drill into the packages of the NuGet and do all the stuff you'd normally be able to do in the original WPF app that existed before this. And then whatever, calculator. So I know that was a lot. I flew through it, but I would yeah. If you're interested at all, like, hit our website, like, just check us out, play around with it, see what you can get working and what you can do with it. If you ever need help or support or whatever, the best two ways are, number one, the Discord channel. So we have a Discord channel within like the WinUI community server, I believe. And so people are on there. Everyone's on there. We're looking at it, and we'll answer any questions. But we also have any issues that you find. The Uno, all of the things, so the toolkit, the themes, the Uno plugin, the Uno itself, all exists open source on GitHub. So go there, and we like to use the discussions feature of GitHub as our sort of like our forum or whatever. So if you have any questions, either Discord or start a discussion on one of the repos. And yeah, they're always monitored, so you'll always get some feedback pretty quick. And that is it. That was okay. That was longer than I thought it would be, but yeah. Sorry about that. But yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah, I learned a ton.